Welcome back. Today I have got Rebecca Charlton on the podcast with me, and I'm really excited to introduce her and to hear about her experiences cycling her way through pregnancy twice. You're in your third trimester at the moment, aren't you, of your second pregnancy? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Second time now and quite heavy again.
I've been watching you on Instagram and seen a few different videos and posts of you Zwifting and riding outdoors through the different trimesters, and you've made a couple of comments about both of the pregnancies being very, very different. Do you want to give a bit of background about what you've experienced and how that has evolved between the two pregnancies?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I think the post that you might be referring to is when I was saying, actually, I can't compare myself at
Yeah.
all to the person that went through the first pregnancy. And I think it's a topic that transcends kind of the themes we're touching on today, doesn't it? Because actually, I think there's so much comparison out there, and that's
Yeah.
whether you would be able to exercise and train and continue to do the things that you normally do throughout pregnancy, or whether actually you might encounter problems and not be able to do that. So I
Yeah.
think firstly, navigating the first pregnancy with exercise, and having been someone that had raced and ridden a bike my whole life, I
Yeah.
was really worried that I wouldn't be able to do anything. I think there was this big narrative the first time,
Yeah.
and things have changed even in
Yeah.
the last couple of years. I think, yeah, when I first found out I was pregnant, I thought, well, I don't know how long I'll be able to carry on. What if I just get too big to get on a bike? Or what if I have problems and I can't do it? And actually, I was so, so fortunate that I managed to cycle through to 40 weeks of pregnancy and still
Was
doing
that
my
indoors or outdoors or a combination of the
a
two?
combination, but quite honestly, I was just on Zwift pretty much every day. So the majority was absolutely indoors for so many reasons, because I, by the end, as you should have seen me, I didn't share all of it, some of it. I was just like barely dressed on the turbo trainer, basically on Zwift sessions. I was like, right, whatever I can physically get on the bike and be comfortable in is absolutely fine. Even if I just like, managed to put a pair of bib shorts on and that's pretty much it. I'm
Yeah.
gonna just be comfortable. And if I went outdoors, I would properly kit up. And I would so often find that even just getting my lycra on, especially when the months were a little bit colder, I was absolutely exhausted before I even got on the bike. And I was like, right, maybe Zwift is like the way to go for the last trimester. But
Yeah.
jokes aside, it was a massive, massive tool. So I think that that's something that I found in the two pregnancies. You don't know how your body's going to respond. You might be pleasantly surprised, as with anything, I think, in life, that you can do more than you think. Or you might have to admit defeat and think this is too difficult. So I think it's just a massive case of seeing how it goes, being kind to yourself, and listening to your body, as hard as that is sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice and sound wisdom, because as every woman is so different, our experiences of menstrual cycle is different, and even in the same year that can evolve and change. And it makes sense that that then translates to pregnancy. I mean, I don't have any kids. My sister has. I've plenty of 12 nieces and nephews, and
Wow.
I know some of my sister and sisters-in-laws. Yeah, there we go. Their pregnancies have all been very, very different. Some have been they're sick the whole time, and others have just sort of sailed through without too much drama. It's so individualistic, and you just don't know what you're going to get. Like for me, I expect if I was to ever have kids, I probably would end up being on the sick the entire period of time, just purely based on the history of my family of the women that have been pregnant and had children, obviously.
Well, this is another huge talking point, because I think there's so many preconceptions and misconceptions around that moment that you find out you're pregnant and what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
And I have found both times around this has been similar. I've been so sick in the first trimester, my first sort of 14 to 16 weeks, both times now. I have just felt sick
Yeah.
24 hours a day. And so for me, it wasn't morning sickness. And again, it's so individual, but I really, really suffered with
Yeah.
nausea. And it was just a constant battle to just function and
Yeah.
do my job and think, right, I just need to get through this block of time feeling this sick. And then as the pregnancy has gone on, that subsided for me. So I was way more energized, way more likely to get on to a Zwift session than I was in the first trimester. And I think
Interesting.
something that I misunderstood, and a lot of people misunderstand, is actually we see a heavily pregnant woman with a big heavy bump, and you think, well, that's the time to be careful, when you should be
Yeah.
restricted, when everyone wants to wrap you in cotton wool and ask if you're okay. And they do, because it's so visible. It's so easy to
Yeah.
see that someone might need assistance. But I think we need to talk more about the fact that actually that first trimester, you probably want to just get back into bed
Yeah.
and not do anything. And that becomes different in each trimester. But we have this image of the first trimester as being, oh, you don't show, you're barely pregnant, crack on. As you get heavily pregnant, be careful. But I personally found, with a lot of research and evidence backed, reading as well, that actually you do need to be cautious in that first trimester. You do need to look after yourself. And for
Yeah.
very obvious reasons, a lot of people want to get through at least that first 12 weeks without sharing it with the world, which is
Yeah.
something I massively respect. And it's something that I went by myself. I didn't tell people, I didn't say on social media until I was beyond 12 weeks. But that is the time people need to say, I think, a little bit more. I need a bit of support. I need a bit of help.
Yeah.
And that might be the time you're struggling the most.
Yeah, I think you're raising a good point, because that's kind of what I was thinking. That first 3 months is typically no one really. It's not often that people will share about a pregnancy until they've passed that 12-week sort of period, and when that is the time that women are more likely to be feeling sick, not just in the morning, but sometimes like all day. And there's a lot of different strategies that can help support that. Sometimes it's the grazing all day, just like nibbling on things. I've heard people be like, oh, I just couldn't have an empty stomach. If my stomach ever got empty, that's when I'd feel sick. And yeah, if you're not feeling very energized, it's not a period of time where you'd be necessarily wanting to exercise or train so much. But I think what has been really reassuring is, especially in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, there's been more studies done. Obviously, researching women and during pregnancy, it's a very challenging time to get ethics to actually do that, those studies. But it is great to see that there are more papers coming through showing that it is okay for women to be doing this high intensity. There's one that came out, I think it was last year, that showed that women could be doing HIIT training and 90% of their max heart rate, and for like a minute at a time, and that wasn't actually causing negative outcomes on them or their baby. And so I think having these papers and research studies showing that it's safe and it's good and it's appropriate for women to continue and to maintain exercise, maybe not necessarily go and start a complete new regime, but at least maintaining what is normal for them. I think it's really reassuring to help change that narrative from the historical, just be still, don't move for 9 months.
Completely. And I think we were saying before we started recording briefly just how much the narrative has evolved and changed. And my daughter is only 2. And in that time, since having the pregnancy with her, the advice is completely different. And I was absolutely staggered actually the other day when I screenshotted it somewhere, and I need to find this, but my little Google, when I first became pregnant with Mila, my first daughter, the NHS advice pretty much came, you get that caption at the top of your web search, and it basically just made it sound like you pretty much shouldn't do any exercise. It's all very risky. Seek advice, be careful. I mean, it certainly wasn't go ahead and do it.
So
It
warning,
really
warning,
wasn't
warning,
like
alert,
that.
alert.
Yeah, there was a lot of caveats, a lot of warnings as to whether you wanted to continue with this dangerous idea of exercising. And now I Googled it literally a couple of weeks ago, and it's completely changed. The NHS quote now is not only that if you're already active, as you say, you should carry on, but it's you should find a safe way to start, and you should be exercising, and it will improve your pregnancy and your birth and your postpartum journey. And that is wildly different in the course of 3 years, which was really, really interesting. And I also, to your point, love the fact that we are seeing so many more women now in the gym doing deadlifts in their third trimester at 30 something weeks pregnant. I'm absolutely here for that sort of content because I think it's so positive, and it's not to say or shame people that are on the sofa with various conditions or just don't feel like doing it in any way. But if you are someone that has worried your way through the pregnancy, which so many of us do, and you've sat there thinking, well, is it selfish in some way? Which I think is the old narrative. It's selfish to look after yourself and want to go to the gym and want to do interval sessions. You've got to just think about the baby now. But actually, I think, and I'm no expert, but from my anecdotal evidence and experience, I think actually to be active and to be you and to have that mental headspace as well to exercise can only be healthy for your pregnancy if you can do it.
Yeah, and obviously there's things that need to be modified, but having that right support, because exercise is much more just than physical or weight management. It is mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's social. Like if you're struggling, like getting out of the house and meeting up with other friends, and they might be pregnant, they might not be, but it gives you a reason to get out the house if you're feeling low or if you're not feeling 100%, and it's just a valuable tool that from a health perspective, the research is showing is actually beneficial for the pregnancy, for the birth, for the postpartum period. And I think it's also great to see now that we're seeing so many more elite female athletes who have taken a break from their career, they've gone and had children, and they've come back and they're still like smashing it in their field, which gives, I think I see it in the cycling world where some women it's either career or children and I've got to do one or the other. But I think it's inspiring to see that it can be both. It doesn't have to be purely one or the other.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the biggest thing here is just I want to try and be as honest as possible. And I love the honesty being out there because I think that's the biggest topic and question, isn't it, around women working, having children, starting a family when you have a career that you've worked so hard for.
Yeah.
There is that $1 million question, can you have it all? And I really could talk all day on the nuances of this, as I'm sure, we all could. But I think it's about being honest. I thought that my career would be over in broadcasting, that, because I think people had sort of had that negativity around me of, oh, well, it's going to be a choice. It's going to be a choice. You can't continue to have the life you have now. Yeah. And then I, again, was so fortunate that I went with baby in tow and was breastfeeding and went back into presenting a few weeks after coming out of hospital. And I didn't know if that would be possible, but I was just very, very happy that it was possible for me. And I found that I reached out to male and female people that I was working with and colleagues and said, I'm exclusively breastfeeding. Are you still happy to have me on this job? Would there be a green room where I could feed? And everybody was amazing. And I know, unfortunately, that's not everyone's experience, but it was mine. And yes, there have been times where I've just thought, is this all too much? This is... I haven't been to sleep. I mean, I did a live broadcast on TV, having pretty much been awake all night for 2 weeks, and I was so tired. And, I had to obviously take the baby to work. My partner, I was so fortunate, came and supported me, and we got through that period of time. And it wasn't easy, but it was possible for me. And so I think, again, you just can't let somebody dictate to you how it's going to look lifestyle wise for you. And I think something I just wanted to go back to, actually, because I think it's another really good point of research that's been done in recent years, is that when I told people that I was interval training through the pregnancy, as you can imagine, people were just like a bit horrified. Like, you're 40 weeks pregnant, you've just done an interval session. Isn't that like the worst possible thing? And then I found myself really explaining to people about that nature of interval training, like you were detailing before, in that you in, with the workouts I was doing, which was the Zwift workouts called Baby on Board, and they're specifically tailored for women advancing through pregnancy. And so every time you did a 30-second block, you then had a longer rest than you'd normally have to bring the heart rate right back down and then go again. And I was trying to explain to people that although we have this image of like HIIT training and interval training as being absolutely mad, I guess this image of why is a pregnant woman doing HIIT training, but actually if you were to sit in a lower zone for a solid hour or 2 hours, as you know, that would just climb your heart rate gradually rather than a hit of it and then recovering, getting your body temperature, your core temperature back down, having a minute with the fan, and then going again. And that again was something I think was quite misunderstood until we had more research around it. And you have amazing companies like Zwift saying they could say, oh, it's too difficult to tailor a training program, we just won't touch it. But they've gone, no, we want to facilitate women, knowing that if I click on that program, I know that's safe for me, and I know it's within it's within the kind of healthy guidelines for pregnancy. So I can't sing their praises enough for doing that, because it just reassures you so much more.
And that you're able to use that to then learn your belief. Like in any sort of training, it evolves and it changes over time, and then perhaps throughout the pregnancies, depending on how it's going, because as you said, like it varies and it's not constant. It is this moving target all the time, that what is like normal for you when you're not pregnant, and then you can see how that evolves and changes when while you are pregnant, or in post-pregnancy, sort of postpartum. Listening and tuning into your body, learning what is right for you. And I think this is a big part of female, whether it's nutrition or training. I don't think we are ever going to see concrete one size fits all guidelines on either nutrition or the training, just because we are all so unique and individual and changing constantly throughout our lifespan. Understanding, okay, this is what on average can work for women, is supported, and how do I fit into this, and how does this align with how I feel? Is this sustainable to me? And learning to listen to yourself, and you see, okay, my heart rate's not coming down, like, all right, maybe I need to like tone it down or take a break.
And I think that's it, isn't it? Is I think all of us in this world that we are in, we all want to have a little look at what our FTP is doing and have some magical idea in our head that actually, I had points where I was like, right, I'm not going to lower it. I'm going to just set my normal FTP and do this. And I was like, I can't. It's like perfectly reasonable that I'm finding this quite hard, and actually now is the time to rein it in. And I think that for me was a real game changer in my mindset, because I started racing on the track on the velodrome when I was 7 years old, and I'd always come through the ranks of cycling with this mentality that it was about training, it was about keeping your body weight down, it was about being competitive and comparing yourself constantly, not only to others, but am I year on year getting better? And then when I was pregnant, although I had stopped racing by then, it gave me this permission to say, this session, it doesn't matter what your FTP comes out at. You're not doing a ramp test. You're 6 months pregnant. You really want to just feel good that you've turned your legs, and actually it might help the swelling in your ankles to go down a bit, which I actually did. And you might just feel happier that you've blasted some really good tunes in your headphones and had a good session. This is just about health and well-being and mental health and getting through each day of this pregnancy and its challenges. It's not about winning a bike race. It's not about comparing yourself to anybody. And then I started to see, comments in the chat when you're on a group ride, for example, on, when you're online, and people sort of saying, oh, this is just and what cyclists can be like, this is just my recovery ride, and it would be quite a hard ride, and people would be like making their excuses and things. And then I used to just drop into the chat like, oh, I'm 38 weeks pregnant this week. Because as I say, it just gave me this permission to be like, it doesn't matter if I drop out of this ride halfway through. It doesn't matter if I ride on my own as slow as I want to go. I'm on the bike and it's making me really feel happy. And that's what is so important. It was a game changer, actually.
Yeah, I think that enjoyment factor of sport, for anyone that has raced or is competitive anyway, I think it can be really hard to tone that down. And I see that with people I work with, often struggling to, like, to do at times to train if there's no purpose. There has to be a reason for it, or it's got to be racing. And I think ultimately with sport for longevity, like, it's something we've got to enjoy it and want to do it. And if you're not enjoying it, then you're not going to continue doing it. And even I was on a ride yesterday, and like outside, and it's been raining quite a lot. The roads are quite slippery, and I was just like, I'm on edge, and we're sort of like maybe not even half an hour into this ride. I'm like drenched because like the wheels keeps like spitting water at me, and I'm just getting. Do you know, you're just getting cranky and just like, oh, this is rubbish. Like just getting angry, and I'm like, do you know what? Like, no, I'm done. I'm turning around. I don't want to climb. I don't want to crash. Like, I'm just going to turn around, go and find dry roads in the sun, and yeah, sometimes people could be like, oh, what are you doing that for? I was like, the rest of my ride, I had a great time. Whereas if I could have kept going on that ride just to prove a point and to finish it, and I would have come home so angry and so cranky, and I wouldn't have actually, it wouldn't have been beneficial for the rest of my day. Whereas having just toned it down and turned it into an easy ride with no purpose, like, it's so much better.
It's such a thing. And I look back and I'm actually shocked now at some of the environments I used to embrace
Yeah.
in cycling, where I would go home genuinely wanting to cry because I'd felt like I was on the back foot for a whole ride, or you got freezing because you got soaked through, even with the most technical kit on. You know, there's only so much it can do in a situation like you've just described, where you're just getting the spray off absolutely everything. You're freezing cold. You're not enjoying it anymore. And I would genuinely come home some days just feeling really upset or really disheartened or down on myself. And actually,
Yeah.
that's not why we do this sport. We do this
No.
sport to improve our well-being. But ultimately, it's a brilliant hobby. It's a brilliant community, and we can all find
Oh,
so much
yeah.
happiness in it. So why are we putting ourselves through these rides where we're coming back just wanting to ditch our bike and skip and cry? Like, that's not why we should be doing it. But when you say the word purpose there, that for me was the real switch in pregnancy. Was my purpose became focusing on just keeping my body moving and for as long as possible. And I did start to put it out on social media, as you know, because I got to the point where I was like, I don't know, tomorrow could be the last day I do a ride. And actually I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, it's 38 weeks, I'm still going. It's 39 and 40 weeks and I'm still going. And I really enjoyed people being able to kind of share in that and comment on it and be like, wow, you're still going. And I was really honest about the fact that I was surprising myself, and I was literally just turning the legs. I'm not,
Yeah.
again, doing anything spectacular on the bike, because that wasn't the point. It was just, can I climb on and can I do it? And can I keep well and can I keep going? And that became really, really important. And then when there were two things that happened which were completely unpredictable. And that was in the third trimester, I ended up completely on crutches and couldn't walk because I had a problem with my pelvis, which is described as PSD or
Yeah.
PGP. And it meant that I went to the doctor and they said, right, this is quite a severe case of it. It's very rare, but it happens to some women during sort of later pregnancy. And yeah, you're going to have to be on crutches now. There's not much we can do about it. And so I went to a private physio and said, do you think that I could cycle? Do you think it would make my pelvis sort of displacement any worse? And he said, I would try it. And if you can
Yeah.
get on the bike and if it's not making it worse and it's keeping you sane and happy, just try it and keep a diary. Does it hurt more the next day? And I actually found that I was able to continue to cycle as long
Yeah.
as actually I could get on the bike, because that was the painful bit, actually getting
Yeah.
on over the
It's
frame. But
going in
once
with
I
that
was on,
conservative. Yeah, you're sort of
yeah,
going in with it conservatively and checking in, like, how does this feel when you don't have any, it is, I think it's interesting because then where like some services, whether it's physio, if they're focused more on the general public, which don't, the general inactive population and public, then if you're someone that is highly active, an athlete or a very active individual, going sometimes to a physio who isn't of that mindset, they can be like, don't move, be still, and not actually supporting your lifestyle if you are like, but I want to ride, I want to be exercising, but how do I keep doing this? And I've seen a lot of people who've then found by going out to a private practitioner at times who has been supportive and encouraging, but giving them guidelines around that to check in with, like, is this helpful or is this perhaps causing harm or making things worse for me?
Yeah, no, I was actually really fortunate that the person I'm referring to was Phil Burt, who many people will obviously know that name because he was absolutely pivotal at British Cycling and Team Sky for working with the best athletes in the world, Dame Laura Kenny and Sir Chris Hoy, and looking at their physiology on the bike. And he is somebody that did a lot with sort of pelvis positioning and health, especially with the women's Great Britain squad going into each Olympic Games, and looking at things like saddle tilt and how do we change. And he actually had the UCI rules changed, which some people may or may not know, because the saddle tilt guidelines, well, strict UCI rules actually, were the same for the men and the women until he got them changed, which is just staggering that you would be expected to ride in the same, for example, team pursuit position as your male counterpart. So he pushed for that and got it changed. So he was the best possible person to say,
oh, for sure.
Could you talk to me about my pelvis? I can't walk. Is it crazy that I'm thinking about trying to cycle? And he was able to talk me through that and say, right, if you're in doubt, call me back tomorrow. So I was in a really privileged position where I could speak to somebody of that caliber who's got that amount of, you know, medical research and backing in their background. So he was absolutely brilliant. But I think it was one of those things where, again, I was just navigating it as I went. And I think that people thought I'd gone a little bit mad because I was posting pictures one day saying, like, basically be bedbound if I didn't have my crutches to get around on, and I was in agony. But then I was posting like Zwift sessions, and so I think it's one of those things that people might have thought, like, how is she saying one day she can't do this but she can cycle? But I think that is testament and to the power of the bike and the fact that actually for mobility, cycling might help somebody that otherwise can't be mobile, and I think that's really crucial. And then the other thing that happened is I'd done all my hypnobirthing preparation and my breathing techniques, and I was fit and healthy and still riding. And I thought, of course, I'm going to have a natural birth. Never thought otherwise, never had any reason to think otherwise because I'd been so reassured through the whole thing. And then things went a little bit awry in labour, unfortunately, and I ended up having an emergency C-section. And then after the C-section, a week later, fell very ill and I was still in hospital. And it turned out that I had a complication from the surgery that hadn't been picked up. And so I was taken into X-ray and I was very, very unwell. And they sort of predicted my recovery time for that. I had a stomach drain put into my, tube put into my stomach. I was just like hooked up to like various different drips. And at that point, they were sort of saying, you know, this could be quite a long journey. And then basically within a week of that, I was home. And they said to me, there is no doubt about the fact that you have been able to stay active and on the bike throughout the pregnancy. That has completely transformed your ability to come through this surgery and to come through the other side of this. And once I was home, you know, I had to continue injections and treatments and things at home, but I was well and I was happy and I was healthy. And I do genuinely thank cycling for that. I really do. And that became, to your point, my absolute purpose on the bike.
That's amazing. Being able to sort of share that and encourage other women to keep trying or to start, but again, being realistic about expectations about like this period. It's not a period of time to like race and to get like, it's not a time of like getting as strong or as fast as possible, but it's more focusing on nourishing your body, looking after yourself and the life that you're growing within you. And from a recovery perspective, after what you went through, if we're not exercising, we're not moving, like our muscles break down very quickly. We can lose a lot of muscle mass, a lot of muscle tone. And so we want to preserve that and protect that to keep our bodies strong and healthy after like for longevity. And so by being active, you would have protected and built and maintained muscle mass that would then help you in that post-injury recovery time point.
It really did. But I think it also comes back to not comparing yourself, because this pregnancy, I had the plan that I would try and ride every day again and I would make it look very similar. But as a lot of people in my position will shout about, having a toddler now, I don't have the luxury that I had before, which I didn't realize at the time was such a luxury, where I could just say, right, I'm going to get out of bed in the morning and just straight away, before I do anything else, do a Zwift session. Now I have a little mouth to feed some Weetabix. She wants to put her hand into any mech or the chain, or she's fascinated, she'd buy the bike. So I can't sort of have her there and cycle, because she basically wants to put her arm into any moving parts of the bike. So I have found it so much more challenging to keep up the fitness this time. Again, I just want to be so open about that, because the other day, for example, and this is the thing, I've got a completely open profile on Zwift. The other day I literally had just about managed to do a session, and I'd been like, right, I want to get on this morning. Okay, no, she needs something else. Okay, like she's done a big poo, so let's sort that out. Okay, now I'm going to get on the bike. And I managed to get on. And by the time I'd faffed for so long sorting her out and handing her over to my partner so I could do a session, I then hadn't charged the iPad enough. And so I literally got 20 minutes into my interval session. And then it probably shows this if you look at my data. The session just like cut out, the iPad died. And I was just like, do you know what? This is just not my day.
It's not meant to happen today.
So anyone who actually bothered to look would have been like, well, I mean, she got on the bike, but what on earth happened in the 20 minutes after that? And I think this is something that, in sharing my journey the first time, people were kind of pointing out, well, lucky you, but I can't necessarily do all this riding. And I think that's the position I'm in now. But I'm also so aware of how massive it was in my health last time, with everything that became a little bit complicated towards the end. It's so important to try and find time for you, even though it's just the hardest thing at some points, with whatever commitment you've got, whether it's because you're a mum or because you have so many other things going on that demand your time. The last thing sometimes you want to do after a long day at work, and like having that motivation to actually say, right, I'm going to prioritize a bike ride, that can be really hard, but it just goes to show that it is important to try and do that.
Definitely. And then also the like letting go of the all or nothing extremes, because even only 20 minutes, that's still benefiting your health, your mood, your mental, and maybe it wasn't as long as you would have liked to, but I think it's so easy for us as cyclists to get into like, oh, if it's not an hour and a half, it's not 2 hours, it's not even worth getting out the door and putting the kid in. But I think it's, and recognizing that we do all go through different stages of life. And I see that with people sometimes who I'm working with, who like they've got the kids, they've got the work, they've got all these priorities and stresses impacting them in their lifestyle, but then they're wanting to be a weight or to be something that they were in their 20s, like 10, 15 years earlier, when they didn't have all those other life challenges going on, and they're setting themselves up to fail because of they're being unrealistic sometimes with their demands or their expectations. And I always like to encourage people to like just take that step back and think about, okay, what's going on in your real life that is affecting this, that can be barriers, and there's ways that we can work with them, but you've got to be flexible sometimes and learn how to adapt for your unique situation.
Completely. And I think that's the hardest thing to do sometimes, isn't it? Is actually rein in your own expectations on yourself and be kind to yourself and say, yeah, I mean, I got on and it wasn't perfect and it didn't go to plan. It wasn't as long as I wanted, but I did something. And I've definitely struggled with that mentality over the years of, if you can't do at least an hour, it's pointless to kit up, but it's not. And I think even just going outside for a walk, if you can't do anything else, think how good you feel after getting that fresh air. And I think that's something that I've really had to consciously shift, is it's not pointless. Looking after your body isn't pointless. And I'd love your take on this, actually. When it comes to nutrition, I think there's so much advice in pregnancy for understandable reasons That especially in the first trimester, you must get this volume of fruit and veg, and this is really important, and this is really, and you must get this nutrition. But unfortunately, the reality for a lot, if not most women, is with sickness, you might end up only being able to suck on a dry cracker one day, or like eat some dry biscuits. Or that was my experience of the blander the better. And I was someone that actually on a busy day, I would know that I'd got my 5 a day in by blending up fruit in the morning and it being the first thing I ate. And that was like my lazy hack to getting my 5 a day. But the acidity of that in the first trimester of pregnancy made me vomit. So I lost all my mechanisms to get the right nutrition in. And I think, again, it's like best laid plans to get up and have your fruit smoothie, but actually it might be a cracker.
Yeah. Whatever stage of life people are in, it's so easy to get into like, it's got to be perfect. I've got to hit every number. I've got to hit every target. And there's just days where everything falls apart. You feel sick. You just don't have any appetite. You're busy. You're running around and you're like, oh my goodness, how is it 1 o'clock and I still haven't had breakfast sort of yet? And I think there is a lot of trial and error because you hear the person like, oh, I drank ginger tea the whole time and I was fine, and I had crackers the whole time and I was fine, and there is a lot of trial and error to see. Like I know some people there was just kind of like the second they woke up they had to kind of like start nibbling on something, and it was then an hour later that they could start thinking about food and swapping timing around. And I think like things like smoothies and juices often get these really bad reputations, like, oh, it's bad, it's too high in sugar, or it's. But again, it can be a convenient way to get the vitamins, the minerals, the fiber in, but you might be having little tiny bits throughout the day, like sipping on it, rather than trying to get through the whole glass in one big hit and then repeating back on you. So I find when someone's appetite is really low, we tend to have to concentrate foods a little bit more, but it's playing around with what works for you. So it might be using yogurts because then you might get a bit the calcium and the protein, but some people might be like, oh, everything tastes different. That's why there's no one size fits all with nutrition, because everyone's got personal preferences, what's available to them, and there is a lot of trial and error to sort of experiment and see what works for you. And that's why I like getting people to write notes for themselves and occasionally, not always track and use food diaries, but getting clear of like, okay, what's happening and how can I improve, or where am I struggling, and finding solutions when you see common patterns. But yeah, if you tried the smoothie for breakfast and you're like, oh, it's repeating me, but then you might find in the afternoon it sits a little bit easier on the stomach, or you have a smaller volume of it rather than trying to drink the whole tub in one go.
So true. And I was someone that I had to actually start. It took me like a few weeks to realize it, but I had to just have something next to the bed because, as you say, I was that person that woke up and I had to line my stomach straight away with something bland, or I would be really sick. So it's it's best laid plans and then what's real for you. But I think also I'd kind of worried so much over the years about my weight, and I think that was really tied into bike racing and power to weight ratio and understandable factors that had really influenced my mindset on that. And then again, I think going through pregnancy was the healthiest change of mindset I could have had, because it actually became, as I could eat more in the pregnancy and I wasn't so sick, it was what's going to fuel my body. And actually, if I'm going to do an hour on the bike, I need to eat properly. It's not about losing weight now. It's not about cycling being this tool to make myself look better in my kit. It's purely about trying to stay well. And that, for me, again, it's shocking to say it's taken me this long in life, but it helped reframe that really negative thinking of reward and I'm going to ride my bike and then I can eat this. It was the other way around completely. It was, how do I fuel my body, and am I eating things that is going to make me feel well and the baby grow? And I think it took really that experience for me to not see it as an individual, slight on myself and my weight and my body image. It was about so much more than that. And that's sort of stuck with me now.
Men and women both in cycling struggle with body image, and there's that narrative of the skinnier, the leaner, the lighter, the better, which isn't always true. I see a lot of people who are scared to eat, and there's that eating is cheating narrative that it's changing, it's evolving slowly, it's getting a lot better, but it's still very deeply enriched in cycling, where people will often believe they're using exercise as a weight loss strategy, which keeps them also trapped and stressed about like, I can't stop, because if I stop, then I'm going to gain weight. Whereas I find when people start feeling they're training better, then yeah, you've got more energy, you enjoy it, you're not feeling so exhausted in a training session, you're recovering faster, but then how you eat and feel afterwards, you're not in that rebound, catch up calories, like Cookie Monster, just can't control myself.
Oh yeah, that was me.
You're not in that big deficit. And I think it also then touches on the comparison thing we were saying a little bit earlier about how we can have these perceptions of what I should look like at a particular phase in life, whether it's pregnancy, because you might see the ladies that are pregnant with the tiny little bump on the winnies. If they're looking away, you wouldn't even know they're pregnant until they turn around. And there's other women that they have gained a lot more weight, and there's a lot of factors that are going to influence that beyond just purely what you're eating. And there can be a lot of stigma and stress and anxiety around that for people who do have any sort of disordered eating thoughts or patterns or behaviors, which is very common in cycling. Having people that can support them and reassure them and know that it's okay. We want you to be gaining weight. That's okay. Like, don't panic about it. Because I've seen people women in the past who, like, they're anxious. They're worried, even though they know they need to gain weight, but they're worried about it because in their head, any increase in that number is negative. However, if you're growing a human, you're growing a baby, then that is going to grow with you.
And it's so important, isn't it, that we continue to talk about it. And that you touched upon one of the most common kind of cliched comments among cycling communities, is that, eating is cheating. And I could list off so many things that were said to me on club rides over the years. And I actually bumped into somebody that I'd cycled with years ago the other day. And he said to me, do you remember when I caught you on camera at the cafe shop with a big slice of cake, and thought it was hilarious. But I really pushed back on it, because I was like, you did take a photo of me with a slice of cake and we put it on the internet, and that's great. So I really don't understand that you're trying to project some negativity on me for eating a slice of cake on a bike ride. Why should I not eat whatever I want to eat at a cafe stop? I found it so insulting, actually. And I think that we have to call it out. And I did. And I said, I don't see your real point. I'm not embarrassed. And you shouldn't be embarrassed about having a slice of cake. That's quite alarming if you are. Yeah. And he'd just unfortunately had it drilled into him, this whole like eating is cheating, just eat nothing but air at the coffee stop and just have your espresso and crack on.
But then you get home and devour everything inside for the next 24 hours. There's so much deeply enriched like rules of good and bad and just norms, and it is changing and it is evolving. But I mean, it's the conversations I had. It's what drove me to do my doctorate research. I was like, why are people so opposed to essentially the best performance out there for cycling? Carbs, fuel, energy. It's like, think about a car. Like, you wouldn't expect your car to move anywhere if it had an empty fuel tank. So why is your body going to not go anywhere fast if you've got an empty fuel tank? And it's not about always being super high carbs, but it's like fueling with foods that you enjoy eating. And what I love seeing is the fact that when you open up that freedom, like, the piece of cake or the biscuit or the cookie, you eat it in a time point where your body needs extra energy. You eat something that you're enjoying eating, and you don't necessarily crave it or want it the rest of the day because you're like, I had it, I'm cool, I'm good. Versus the traditional historical, like in racing season, super, super strict, and then you got your off season, go crazy, eat all the foods, then maybe your weight's gone up, and then you panic, and then restrict, and then back up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down.
Yeah, and exactly all of the above. And also, I think it's happily getting there. It's gradually changing. That actually you don't have to be a certain weight to start bike riding and to enjoy it. And it's far better to be happy and healthy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Than,
Oh, for
like you
sure.
say, depleting yourself and then building up so many sort of mental and physical issues around it. And I know that's, that's not to sort of make it sound like such a simple equation. I know that a lot of bike riders really chronically struggle with body image.
Oh, for
But
sure.
we are seeing all shapes and sizes of people now embrace bike riding. And I certainly feel much more comfortable to show an image of myself, whether it's pregnant or not, just looking like I look. And in the past, I didn't feel like that. And we wouldn't necessarily compare a world tour sprinter to a climber and say, well, why isn't that sprinter exactly the same weight as Tadej Pogacar? Because we understand pro bike racing to an extent that we know, well, he's going to have a different build because he's more powerful. He's going to be there in the mountains. So why do we all impose on ourselves that we have to be a certain body shape to look like a bike rider? I think hopefully that is getting there and it's changing.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, still been trying to get Jonas Eriksson on the podcast for the last year or so. Just keep missing each other for dates and times because he's 20 kilos heavier and was in the polka dot jersey and is just as lean as he was at 60 kilos and 80 kilos, but he's faster and he's stronger. And so having these athletes that we can demonstrate and show that just being the lightest and leanest version of you isn't always the healthiest or the most powerful or the most robust, but again, you've got to have the right environment of coaches and support staff and people around you. And I'll see like amateur athletes and clients that I work with at times, and I think sometimes if you're the first person, that's often the hardest. If you're the first person in your club, in your group ride, to start fueling, it can be hard to change that culture. And I've had guys and girls who put like drink mix in their bottles and it's the secret fueling. And then they start, when they feel better, they're like, oh, this works. I was like, mm-hmm. And then they forget to do it one day and they feel rubbish again. And they're like, oh, no, actually, I want to keep doing it. And then they start bringing a bar or a cookie. And then someone else is like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then someone else starts. And all of a sudden, it's gone from no one doing it to a couple of people fueling. And then slowly the ripples change. And then it's the norm. And it's the exception if you're not fueling. But it takes that first person to be brave and to give it a go and to put it and to regardless and be able to knock off all the comments that people are going to say, because unfortunately people shouldn't be commenting on your weight or your body size or your food choices, but they will, unfortunately.
Yeah, they absolutely shouldn't. It makes me absolutely enraged. But I think that's the absolute nail on the head. The amount of times on group rides, as I kind of was more experienced and got more confidence, I would be like, I am going, if it's a long ride, I'm going to get my food out of my pocket and I'm going to start eating maybe after an hour or, quite early on in the ride. I'm going to start fueling and I'm going to eat a bar or half a bar or whatever I feel like that I've worked out I need. And you're right. It would be that kind of like, oh, why are you, why are you eating? Eating is cheating, of course.
You're eating again?
Actually, and then you're going to get your picnic out. And then people would be, and it's like if you say you need to stop for any reason, everyone almost does this sigh of relief that they also want to have something to eat. But how ridiculous in our sport that that's become the norm, that you have to have a level of confidence to be able to say, I'm going to choose to eat something. Because actually in day-to-day life, if you went out for a coffee with a friend, you were like, oh, I haven't eaten this morning, I'm starving, I'm going to eat something. You're not going to get judged for that. But the moment we become bike riders, it's like, well, you're eating after an hour, I'm going to not eat until we stop. Like this sort of badge of honor. And I really, really hope. And stories, like our polka dot jersey, he's phenomenal for speaking out on that. And I think it really turned a lot of heads as to what actually is important.
I couldn't agree more. It's something that I'm very passionate about for all people, to getting them to fuel it's not just, it's their health, it's their performance, it's their body composition, fuel your life, fuel your ride, and fuel in your mind, because food is more than just numbers. It's social. I'll see a lot of people, especially if they're competing or like the sub-elite or elite level, where they have this mindset or they thought, thinking that they can't eat out, or they can't eat out with friends, and they're being really isolated and lonely. And I was like, no, like, you don't have to be so perfect about food. And the athletes that have longer successful careers are often the ones that just a little bit more relaxed, but learn how to embrace these extra foods, whether it's the pizza or the burgers or the chips or a beer here and there. It's not a case of do it every single day, but when you learn to sprinkle it in on a regular basis and incorporate it, then you're less likely to be thinking about it 24/7, or do the secret eating, or get into off season and go crazy of eating all the foods that you've been off the menu for the past 9 months.
Completely. Yeah, I think we're getting there.
Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your experience. And it's great to hear that you've seen so much change in the pregnancy arena of how, like, for sport, for exercise, being active, and the nutrition side of that as well. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Oh my gosh. This is something I completely haven't prepared. Okay, so my words of wisdom would be to focus on yourself. It's so important, whether that's in real life, in your group ride, or on social media, doing the doom scrolling. Do not change your wants and needs because of what somebody else is doing. If you're feeling great doing something, continue to do it. If you're super happy with where you're at, do not let someone steal that joy from you. If you're halfway through a ride and somebody makes a comment to you, do not take that on board. The problem lies with them, not you. And I feel so strongly about those parting words, because I hate the fact that anyone would come into the wonderful sport of cycling or the hobby of cycling and have that joy in any way dulled down by somebody else's insecurity. So I think whatever your ride looks like, whatever you want to wear, however you want to present yourself, you do you. And that should be embraced. And if it's not being embraced, find a different set of people to cycle with.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's great pieces of advice to share. And thank you so much for your time. It's been great chatting with you and meeting you finally in person or online.
Thank you so much. I know, it feels like we're in person, and thank you so much for having me. This is a topic, as you can tell, I could talk all day, so thank you so much. I've loved it.
Well, that's all for today. Like, subscribe, fuel your ride, and I'll see you next time.